Good evening, everyone. 2 weeks from today, voters in New Jersey will elect their next governor, and tonight, the candidates meet in their second televised debate. Now, the latest polls indicate that Governor Jim Florio is leading Republican challenger Christine Whitman. Florio has made a remarkable comeback after his popularity plummeted following his big tax hikes early in his administration. Christine Whitman is trying to close the gap with her economic plan, promising big tax cuts to up to 30% over 3 years, and she's blasting Florio for his tax increases. Channel 10 anchor Ken Manahan will be one of 3 reporters questioning the candidates tonight. Now from Whippany, New Jersey, the governor's debate. There you see the scene live. A latest Star Ledger Eagleton poll indicates right now that most voters feel like Christine Whitman would do about the same or even worse than incumbent governor.
Manahan.
Now the debate.
Welcome to the second debate of the 1993 gubernatorial election in the state of New Jersey. Tonight is an opportunity for you to hear the candidates, the major party candidates, answer questions on a wide variety of subjects that are of concern to the citizens of this state. And just 2 weeks to go before Election Day, November 2nd. I'd like to introduce the candidates to you this evening. Governor Jim Florio, the Democratic candidate. Challenger Christine Whitman, the Republican candidate. The format for tonight's debate is straightforward. Each of the candidates will be asked questions in an alternating fashion by a panel of reporters. They will have 60 seconds to respond to those questions. They will also be given 60 seconds for rebuttal. There will be no opening statements tonight, but each of the candidates will be given 90 seconds for closing remarks. I'd like to introduce our panel of reporters this evening. Ken Manahan, news anchor, WCAU-TV, Channel 10 in Philadelphia. Ren Scott, New Jersey correspondent, WCBS-TV Channel 2 in New York. Michael Aron, senior political correspondent, NJN News. I'd like to remind our live audience here tonight in Whippany that you should hold all of your applause until the end of tonight's format. And I thank you ahead of time and appreciate your doing that for us this evening so that we can make the most of our time in listening to the candidates. And now, as the moderator of this debate, I have the first question, and it has been determined by a coin toss that I will ask that question of Mrs. Whitman. Mrs. Whitman, you are calling for a 30% income tax cut over 3 years in New Jersey, adding up to $1 billion in reduced revenue in this state. The plan has been criticized as vacuous and lacking credibility. In the last debate, you were asked for a detailed explanation of required budget cuts. You only offered to eliminate a designer sneaker program from the Corrections Department, doing away with executive search firms, and holding spending to 3% growth in the state. Since then, polls show you still trailing in this race. This may be your last opportunity to speak directly to the voters of this state in a live audience here tonight and persuade them that your plan is credible. Mrs. Whitman, what departments, what programs, what expenditures specifically could take a large enough hit to accomplish your goal?
Kent, I appreciate that question because it does give me an opportunity to lay out once again for the people the fact that this is an economic recovery plan. I said at the very onset when I detailed the economic recovery plan that there are over $500 million right now in savings that were presented by the various management improvement programs by both this governor and Governor Kane that have never been enacted. I mean, you know, and I have said continuously, a hiring freeze and attrition saves you $40 million. Management mainstreaming, streamlining is between $40 and $50 million. If we eliminate a double coverage of health for health care packages of state workers, you save between $50 and $70 million. And to paraphrase Everett Dirksen, $1 million here and $1 million there, and you're talking about real savings. What I am talking about doing is cutting the rate of growth of government, limiting it so that it only rises at the rate of inflation, and that saves $500 million. The Republican legislature did it before, $1.1 billion they cut. I can do this.
All right, we will now begin the questioning with our panel of reporters. Ken Manahan, your question for Governor Florio.
Governor Florio, you just heard what Christy Whitman had to say about taxes. On behalf of all taxpayers, I'd like to know what your tax plan is. Usually, talk of a tax cut can win votes. In 1989, you had a plan, but your 1990 $2.8 billion tax increase was not part of it during the campaign. If you can't offer any guarantees about new taxes, why should anyone vote for you based on your current plan?
Well, offering guarantees is exactly what the problem is. Mrs. Whitman is now talking about guaranteeing property tax, or rather tax reductions. It was interesting, she's sending out now urgent grants, which are promising everybody $1,000 in their pocket if they vote for her. Next, we're talking about timeshare, condos, and Ginsu knives. Well, you have to have some credibility when you talk about these things. What we've done is we've just come through 3 tough years in a recession when we've had balanced budgets, no new taxes, in a declining economy. We even put money aside. We created a rainy day fund. We've capped spending. We have been able to start this year with a $400 million surplus. I am confident that we are going to be infinitely better off than we were in the last 3 years. With the economy starting to rise, certainly revenues are starting to come in. We're starting to see the economy pick up. But am I going to guarantee there'll be no new taxes in the next 4 years? It would be irresponsible. As a matter of fact, I was pleased to see that Mrs. Whitman took the same position I do. That it would be irresponsible to guarantee no new taxes.
Governor, there's always fat in any administration. You've had plenty of time to find out where it is in yours. Could you tell me at least 3 places you would trim the fat if you're reelected?
Well, it's an easy thing to do because we have already taken 10,000 personnel out of the payroll. There were 10,000, at the end of this year, there'll be 10,000 fewer people on the state payroll than when I came into office. We have already taken out $1.8 billion worth of cuts on the basis of our audit commission. I'll give you an example. When we came in, I believe there were 79 state automobile repair facilities around the state. We consolidated that down to 29. We saved $13 million in the process of doing it. We've consolidated whole departments. We've coordinated programs to be able to affect the savings, and we're going to continue to do that same type of thing, to provide to the people of this state more cost-effective government. The combination of being able to lean down the government and with the economy starting to come back should be in a position that we should be in a position to be able to go through the next couple of years with a good, healthy economy, being able to provide the services to the people that we need.
Mrs. Whitman, your rebuttal.
Well, I'm delighted to hear the governor talk about credibility vis-a-vis taxes, because I think he has very little because of his promises and broken promises. He claims credit for balancing budgets for 3 years. That's the law. You have to. That's in the Constitution. He talks about no new taxes. Well, I don't know about you, Jim, but everybody else has been paying those taxes for the last 3.5 years. We've done all this cutting. Why is it that we have seen over these 3.5 years an average rate of growth of 24% for 3.5 years? That's not leaning down, that's leaning up. And just looking at the department that I know something about, the Board of Public Utilities, when it was merged with the DEP, that would have been an ideal opportunity to get rid of some of those upper-level political patronage appointments. We still have 3 commissioners of that department. If you're serious about cutting, those are the kinds of cuts you have to make, and you have to say no to your political cronies.
Ren Scott, your question for Mrs. Whitman.
Mrs. Whitman, the only elected office you have ever held is that of a freeholder in Somerset County, and consequently, many people have had to look to your campaign for an indication of how you might manage and how you might lead. And when people look to that campaign, they see an awful lot of problems. There was the failure to vote in the local school board election, the hiring and firing of the man who created the controversial Willie Horton ads. There was the flip-flopping on the tax issue, the inaccurate attacks on the budget of the governor's wife, and the list goes on and on. My question to you is, do you take responsibility for all the missteps in your campaign, and are they not somehow an indication of how you might lead and manage if you were governor of this state?
Well, Ren, of course I take responsibility for my campaign, and I think we've been doing very well, and the polls are showing a closing, and I think Election Day will show a real closing, because we're going to win. And quite frankly, I am proud of that. I have not been in public office all my life. I have not spent 24 or 26 of the last years serving at the public's expense and being paid for by the public. But I have held office as a cabinet officer, managing a $14 million agency, and that record speaks for itself, to the point where the union that I worked with, CWA 1037, endorsed me. because they know me as a manager, and we were able to deliver the services of the Board of Public Utilities to the people efficiently and effectively. And that's important. That's what we're talking about, and that's how it's going to go forward. The problems that we have faced in our campaign are nothing like the problems that I believe this governor's faced in his administration. Nothing has risen to the level of grand jury investigations or subpoenas. And the mistakes that we have made, it may have the fact that I believe we have to address issues in more than 30 and 60-second sound bites.
Mrs. Whitman, you partially explained that by saying you have not had a long career in public office. Now, that may work when you're talking about a campaign, but you are talking about one of the biggest tax cuts, the biggest tax cut in the history of this state. There can be no missteps. This is a huge undertaking. You have to go in there and immediately know what you're doing.
Absolutely.
We have not seen that in your campaign at all.
Well, I would dispute you on that, first of all. Again, I think the campaign has been running very well, or I wouldn't still be here. I'd won a primary, and a lot of people said things weren't going well then. Also understand that I have 5 governors from across this nation who have endorsed this tax plan, who know it can be done because they've done the same thing in their states. I've got the legislative leadership here, the Republicans in both houses who have committed to do this, and they've shown they can do it. The only time we've seen tax cutting and we've seen real cutting in government budgets has been over this governor's veto and done by the Republicans. That's the team that I put together along with a line item veto and the impoundment authority. They're going to enable me to deliver on the cutting in government growth that I promised the citizens of this state. I'm going to do that.
Michael Aron, your question for Governor Florio.
Florio gets a rebuttal.
Good, your rebuttal.
Let me just say that Mrs. Whitman is stating her intention to cut $1.5 billion is what it is, $1.5 billion out of the budget. And you're correct, she has got a record in government. When she was on the Board of Chosen Freeholders in Somerset County, 72% was the increase in spending during that period of time. She cast 2,731 votes. One of them was for a decrease in spending. 4 of them, by the way, were for increases in her own salary. When she went to the BPU, and talk about patronage appointments, she conceded in her confirmation hearings that she had no experience whatsoever in that position. And while she was there for 2 years, spending went up by 23%. This is not a cutter. What we're saying in this campaign is that Mrs. Whitman owes it to everyone to, at least with some minimum degree of specificity, spell out where she's going to cut. Not generalized statements of efficiency and things of that sort. She's going to be cutting into programs that go to the core of property tax relief. And therefore, she owes it to everyone to spell out where she wants to cut.
Michael Aron, your question for Mr. Florio.
Governor Florio, I think it's fair to say that you have ridiculed Mrs. Whitman's economic plan in the campaign and here tonight. Part of that plan is to raise the threshold above which people pay state income tax from $3,000 to $7,500. Mrs. Whitman says it will help the inner city poor, and that's why she proposes it. It probably wouldn't cost the state that much in lost revenue. If re-elected, would you consider adopting that part of the plan?
Michael, the difficulty is you can't talk about a part of something. But clearly, if that was the only part of Mrs. Whitman's plan, it would be dismissed as virtually irrelevant to the micro or the macroeconomic situation that we have in this state. The problem is she's talking about this grandiose program that will promise the moon to people. They're going to get 30% reductions. They're going to get $1,000 in their check in their pockets as a result of her election. And said that in the urban areas, she'll promise them 50% reductions. This all adds up to, as I said, at least $1.5 billion, and we don't even have the foggiest notion as to what programs are going to be eliminated. Mrs. Whitman, while she's talking about cutting, is also out promising increasing government spending. In the Department of Commerce, she has been specific. In the Department of Corrections, she's been specific. In the Department of Agriculture, she's been specific. She's talking about increasing their budgets by $1 million, millions of dollars rather, and she's talking about cutting, but in the abstract. You can't have both ways.
You would not adopt the proposal that would help people at the bottom end of the scale?
Well, I will look at the specifics of it, but to go and to talk about one's whole campaign being based upon that relatively small amount of what it is that what she is talking about, it seems to me is not credible. And over and above that, to pull that little piece out of this large package, the political attractiveness of what it is she's trying to put forward, huge cuts, is not driven by that component of the plan. It is driven by her holding out the prospect of 30% reductions in everyone's taxes across the board.
Well, Michael, once again, we have what we heard before when the Republicans cut the penny off the sales tax and when they cut the governor's proposed budget, $1.1 billion. The governor stood there and said parks were going to close and the senior citizens were going to be on the street and the world was going to come to an end. And it didn't happen. He doesn't understand it because he hasn't been part of it. In Congress, Governor Florio voted to raise his salary. He voted against every opportunity he had to cut spending in the Congress and of the Congress. When I was at Somerset County and he talks about increases, we lowered the property tax rate and we were able to do something he wasn't able to do. We kept a AAA bond rating in that county during the time I was freeholder and freeholder director. So I'm very proud of that, and when the budget of the Board of Public Utilities went up, we became the Department of Energy. We absorbed them to keep people from losing their jobs. So I know what it's like to control spending, and I know what it's like to see cuts. His record doesn't show that, and we haven't had that in this state.
We have now reached the point in the second round of questioning where the candidates have an opportunity to ask questions of one another. By a toss of the coin, it has been determined that Governor Florio will ask the first question of Mrs. Whitman. There will be no rebuttal time in this format. Governor?
Mrs. Whitman, in the course of the discussions about the two-page plan, I've seen nothing stated about the provision in the Constitution that talks about the allocation of income tax revenues. Can you share with us your thoughts as to how your plan will interact with that specific provision of the New Jersey Constitution that talks about income tax revenue distribution?
Income tax revenue distribution is going to obviously be affected by the amount of the decrease in overall spending. And what it's going to do is going to enable us and going to require us to have a discipline that we haven't seen to date. We have not seen a discipline of controlling the rate of growth of state government spending. We have seen in the last 3.5 years government growth at 2 to 3 times the rate of inflation. There isn't a family in the state of New Jersey that's been able to enjoy that kind of a growth. In fact, we have seen so many people leave that it has caused real heartache here. It's not just a question of numbers. It's a question of people and families. It's the couple that I met the other day at the Route 1 flea market who said they'd both lost their jobs in the last year. And when they lost their jobs, they lost their health insurance. And when they lost their health insurance, one of them got sick, and they didn't know what to do. That's the kind of hurt and fear we've had from the policies of the last 3.5 years, and that's why it's so important that we do cut the income tax, because it will create jobs. This is a job creation program, and that's what it's all about.
It is now your turn, Mrs. Whitman, to ask Mr. Florio a question.
Governor, at the first debate, you stood next to me and claimed that your policies had been creating jobs, and that you currently have an ad on television that claims you are fighting a national recession to save jobs. The federal unemployment numbers tell us that while New York and Pennsylvania's unemployment rates went down, New Jersey's unemployment rate went up. In fact, we've lost 79,000 jobs since June, and over 118,000 workers have left this state during those same 4 months. Just last week, the Wall Street Journal quoted the Corporation for Business Enterprise in D.C. as stating that New Jersey rated 46th in the nation as a place to do business. Pennsylvania 17th, Connecticut 19th, New York 22nd. In light of these statistics, what can you possibly tell the people of New Jersey that you will do differently to reverse these trends and stop the hurting?
I was troubled by that report in the Wall Street Journal, and I went and checked on it. And it turns out that the article was based upon an article that was written in 1986, in the middle of the Kane administration that you were a member of, and that small business at that point was apparently a article not doing very well by the state. I think if someone wanted to update, and if one was credible, one would go and do that. You would see that our EDA is working very, very closely with the small business community, with the medium-sized business community. We provided some $1 billion in loans and assistance to companies, creating 30,000 jobs. In this last week, since the last debate, Bristol-Myers Squibb invested $64 million in a project in New Brunswick. That's the third major investment that they've made, over $200 million in New Jersey in the last 3 years. Lehman Brothers announced that they are coming to New Jersey, 900 workers, and they promised to hire another 500. Six Flags at Great Adventure is on the verge of making a major announcement that is going to help our tourism industry. So we can have numbers, but the business people know where it is they want to invest, and they're not doing this because they like us. They do it because they have optimism about the future in New Jersey.
All right, we are going now back to our panel of reporters to continue the question. Ken Matz, your question for Mrs. Whitman.
Mrs. Whitman, most people learn about their candidates through radio and TV these days, and recently you've been dishing out some negative campaign ads. An example, Jim Florio, he may be the worst governor New Jersey's ever had. That doesn't really tell the voters that you have a better plan and what that plan might be. On the other side, it's just as bad, though.
I have to remind the audience to please refrain from that. Thank you.
On the other side, it's just as bad, though. Whitman on welfare, out to lunch. And does Whitman even understand? Now, political analysts tell me there's one very good reason negative ads are used, and that's that they are effective. But what I'd like to know is, does that mean in the waning days of this campaign, things are going to get even dirtier on both sides?
Certainly not on my side. And as you know, the first two ads that we went out with were ads that actually talked about the economic plan and how it was going to work. And I think actually I do owe the governor an apology. He's probably not the worst governor. I give that honor to Benjamin Franklin's son, who was taken out of the state in handcuffs for supporting King George's tax increases. But this is about more than that. And you're right, because the way I have been portrayed in the governor's ads is someone who drives drunk after dark with an Uzi shooting at people, and that's simply untrue. It's been taking positions of mine and distorting them. I do not support assault weapons, and I have not supported assault weapons. As the first woman governor of the state of New Jersey, no one's going to be tougher on deadbeat dads than I'm going to be. And I support welfare reform and I have stated publicly that I am going to support every mandatory minimum that currently exists. I think we ought to be careful as we expand those, but I want to be tough on criminals, and that's why I say third-time violent offense, and you're gone for good in the state of New Jersey.
Your response, Mr. Florio.
Seeing a little conversion here tonight, which is interesting and welcome. First ad out of the box this year was a wrongful attack on my wife, which was subsequently pulled. I have been categorized as Nazi-like in putting forward a welfare reform program that I happen to think is very important in asserting parental responsibility. Mrs. Whitman has been talking about a whole lot of things that really she should have some concern about credibility, because she said she's not in favor of repealing our assault weapon ban. But then she said it was a lousy law, and she wants to dramatically change it to put some of the prohibited weapons back into circulation. She wants to grandfather all of the weapons. And now, this last week, we learned that she wants to be able to have people pass them on to their heirs. Well, that's nice. I'm not sure what anyone would do with a Tech 9 or anyone would do with a street sweeper. But if she feels strongly about it to that degree, that's fine. I guess we got some sense of why in the last few days when her campaign manager, Ed Rollins, in the Washington Post, said that the NRA is a very important ally of the Republican Party. But I guess I don't have any difficulties talking about what we represent and what it is we're trying to do. I want to do that, and I just think all the things that we've talked about in this campaign about her record are all fair comment.
Ren Scott, your question for Governor Florio.
Governor Florio, last May, it was revealed that your former chief of staff, Joseph Salema, suddenly resigned after it was revealed that both the FBI and the Securities and Exchange Commission were investigating a possible kickback scheme involving his company, Armacon Securities. Now, your explanation of that incident has been that he resigned to avoid becoming a distraction during this campaign. Now, legally, it may turn out that Joseph Salema did absolutely nothing wrong, but morally and ethically and administratively, is it not wrong to have someone so high in your administration who can make hundreds of thousands of dollars based on decisions that your administration makes?
Well, Ren, you're really jumping to a whole lot of conclusions, none of which have even been asserted yet. And I think it is very important that all of us not go beyond what it is that's even asserted in terms of charges. Mrs. Whitman, the day after it came out, demanded that he resign, and in fact, what he did is choose to resign rather than have that as a major issue. I mean, if we're going to talk about ethics, we're going to talk about who it is that's on the right side of the law. I have not been accused and fined for failing to pay my income taxes. Mrs. Whitman has. I have not hired illegal aliens. I have not been charged with breaking the campaign laws and found guilty of breaking the campaign laws. I mean, Mrs. Whitman has been. I have not been involved in conflicts of interest when I was on the board of freeholders, which I was never on, to be putting money into a bank that I controlled and then going on to the board of directors. So I don't have any difficulty with us spelling out high standards, and I have. Executive Order number 1 in my administration said that everyone had to fully disclose all of their assets, and the people that didn't want to do that are gone. I'm more than happy to match ethical levels with anyone in the room.
You have a follow-up?
Well, you talk about disclosure. Obviously, you've known Mr. Salema for a long time, about 20 years. You knew very well the type of business that he was in. Why were his business interests not put into a blind trust immediately when he came on board of the administration? Why did you wait 6 months until there were implications of wrongdoing and questions asked?
Well, there were no...
I have to ask you once again, audience, to please refrain from all clapping. It is unfair to the candidates and it is unfair to the reporters up here. We are here to hear the responses of the candidates tonight. Thank you very much.
Well, there were no implications of wrongdoing. The only thing that has occurred have there been leaks in a newspaper that charge someone. No authoritative official has ever charged anything of anyone. I'm the one that has gone and changed all the rules in our state in terms of leasing, going out to bid. After this whole thing emerged, we went and changed the practices, what were the prevalent practices in previous administrations with regard to bonds and bids. We were the one that charged and provided for full disclosure of income. So we've set a very, very high standard of ethical propriety. And as I said, I'm not the one that presided over the BPU and had a court come down and said that there was an illegal land deal in the waning days of Mrs. Whitman's administration. The court found that competitive bidding laws had been circumvented and that there had been an illegal transfer of waterlands to a developer. So again, I'm more than happy to have anyone match my personal record or my administration's record against anyone else's record with regard to ethical propriety.
Response, Mrs.
Just
Whitman.
once, I wish the governor would get his facts straight, but given the fact that this administration has so many things hanging over it, I guess it's not surprising that he feels the need to try to make up things about us. We have never, ever been fined for non-payment of our income taxes, Governor. Get that straight. I also understand that we're talking about an administration that has 2 grand juries investigating, and in fact another member of the administration is going to be called to testify before a 3rd grand jury. We have a Securities and Exchange Commission that's investigating this administration. There are 16 different levels of government that have had their papers subpoenaed in light of investigations going on in this administration. We have allegations of abuse of certificate of needs for nursing homes and misuse of influence on deals with former legislators. I mean, it's staggering how much has been going on, and he stands here and has the gall to say to me that I have low ethical standards, or to say that he would call us into question at all. That's outrageous. And besides, I also know that on the watershed deal that you referred to, what the courts found was there was a better way to make it stronger based on my language, and as I set out so clearly in my statement at the time.
Michael Aron, your question for Mrs. Whitman.
Mrs. Whitman, the question is about school funding. You've said that if Judge Levy's finding that urban schools need $450 million more is upheld, you would reallocate existing funds. You also told us at a press conference last week you would not necessarily take money away from suburban schools. The Department of Education's operating budget is $88 million. The rest is all state aid to school districts. If you're not going to take it away from wealthier districts, where would $450 million come from?
Well, Michael, when you've got an administration that finds itself in the position with a commissioner who finds herself in the position of saying she doesn't know where $14 million in desegregation aid has gone, she can't identify, and her assistant commissioner for finance says that we may never know where 50 cents out of every one of the dollars spent for the Quality Education Act, $1.5 billion in the governor's own words. I believe that we can find $450 million within that budget. That's the point of getting into the administration, getting control of it, and starting to get accountability into the system. I think one of the biggest tragedies we've seen over these last 3.5 years is what we've done to our children, to rob them of their future. Here it is, 3 years later, $1.5 billion spent, and we're not any better off, and our children aren't any better off. And that's the real tragedy here. And we have an administration and people in the administration who don't know where the money went. That's unacceptable. That is something that you just can't look people in the eye and say, this is about the future. That's why it's so important we get accountability into the system. We establish core curriculum standards. We ensure it doesn't matter where a child goes to get an education, they'll get the same level. And we judge that effectiveness by whether or not they can go out after high school graduation and either get a self-supporting job, if there were any, or go on to higher education and be mainstreamed.
With all due respect, I still don't hear you saying where you would get the money from.
I have said the entire budget is $4.8 billion. We're looking to a 3% increase. That's $5 billion. We can find it within that budget. you can find $450 million. And we don't know what we're talking about is discrepancy here. We don't know the time frame under which we're going to have to find that. But we can find it.
Governor, your response.
Yes, let me just, this is very interesting. The question I asked to Mrs. Whitman before about the constitutional provision that specifically dedicates all of the income tax monies to a special fund that has to be used for property tax relief. A portion of that money is used for school aid assistance, which is a form of property tax relief. Mrs. Whitman is going to cut $1.5 billion out of the budget. A good portion of it is going to come out of that fund, which is going to our schools. Yeah. She also has been lamenting for 3 years the fact that I increased monies, the income tax, which are going to that school, to those schools. So in a sense, what she's doing is taking a double hit, saying she didn't want the money to go to the schools, which now allegedly are underfunded. And then over and above that, she's going to take more money out of the system, which is funding the schools, which according to a lower court, which I disagree with, is providing that they are underfunded. This is totally incoherent. You can't be saying you're going to provide for more funding, and you can't be saying that you're going to try to balance the budget when you didn't want the money that went in the first place, and then you're going to take it out of the tax relief mechanisms that, among other things, finance the schools.
Ken Matt, your question now for Governor Florio.
Governor, as we've already heard this evening, you take great pride in the New Jersey assault weapon ban and other regulations placed on handguns that help to make New Jersey the toughest place in the nation when it comes to gun control. But Lieutenant Joe Richardson of the Camden Police complained to me just today that virtually all of the charges involving gun regulations are routinely plea bargained away in just about every case. Lieutenant Richardson and other members of the force want to know why we must have these tough laws if they're really not going to be enforced.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the entree to be able to talk about mandatory sentencing and minimum sentences so that there will be no such plea bargain. There will be no such discretion to downgrade effectively the penalties in the law. When I signed the bill that said that if you carjack, a relatively recent form of street vandalism and street thuggery, you're going to go away in New Jersey for 5 years. Mrs. Whitman said that was too tough, and she expressed her opposition. Tonight, I think I heard a bit different tune, but the fact of the matter is what we've tried to do is to spell out, particularly in violent crimes or potential crimes with violence involving handguns, that there'll be a certain penalty that you can rely upon, that if you go and carjack, you will go away, not a day shorter. Mrs. Whitman has not supported that.
A follow-up?
Yes, Governor, if you talk to a police officer in New Jersey these days, he or she is just as likely as not to complain about the system. In Camden, for example, according to the latest crime statistics, the number of homicides, the number of rapes, the number of juveniles involved in homicides also on the increase. With all due respect, Governor, what have you done so far to stop this alarming trend, and what are you going to do in the future?
Well, picked really don't reflect the statistics in the whole state. And what we have to do is to go target in those areas where there are problems. And part of what we're doing is establishing community policing programs. The General of the United States came in and said that New Jersey was way ahead of all of the other states in terms of getting more police on the beat in the communities. If you go to Camden, go to East Camden, where we've just established a mini police station. The business people in the Federal Street area will tell you that things have changed dramatically since we've had this police presence in this mini station. Police on the beat is a very key part of what we've tried to do in our community policing programs, and we're going to continue to do that. But that does not in any way detract from the need to have certainty and strong laws for a relatively small number of people who are the career criminals, who are disproportionately responsible for a large amount of the crime. So what's the balance? Prevention of crime with things like our DARE program and community policing, and tough crimes for those who are violent offenders.
Your response, Mrs. Whitman.
The statistics that you cited are precisely the reason why you can't rely solely on mandatory minimum sentences to dissuade behavior. That's why I've called for third-time violent offenders going away for good, because in 50% of the cases of those current inmates have an average of six prior offenses, 6 prior arrests, 9 prior offenses. It is something, it's a cycle that we have got to break. The Attorney General, whom he talks about, who will be coming back in for him again, I'm sure, also opposes mandatory minimum sentences. What we need is judges who understand it's their responsibility to enforce the law, not to write the law. We need to intercede earlier with our juveniles. That's why I've called for boot camp, something the governor said he was going to deliver in 1989, and like so many of the other promises, didn't. That's why we have got to start to make sure that we have a law that says you serve 70% of your sentence. Right now, the average length of sentence served is 20 to 25% of the sentence given. That's what's wrong with the system.
The next question goes to Mrs. Whitman. Ren Scott.
Mrs. Whitman, in many school districts in this state, school children are being introduced to AIDS education as early as kindergarten and first grade. And many students are being introduced to alternative lifestyles as early as second and third grade. And many parents are reacting by saying, this is much too young, much too early. My child is losing his or her innocence, and they are not having a chance to be a child. As the mother of 2 children, I would like to ask you at what age you would like your children introduced to AIDS education, alternative lifestyles, and in addition, at what age do you believe that your children should have access to condoms?
Well, quite frankly, I treat those in 2 different ways. AIDS education is something that our children were exposed to education at the early grade, starting in about the 5th grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, and that was an appropriate time for them. And I think that was right. Alternate lifestyles is something that comes as you get into the older years. 9th and 10th grades are appropriate times, although throughout education we should be teaching our children to accept people on their face value. It's not a question of teaching lifestyles. That's not what it's about. It's about teaching acceptance. It's about teaching understanding. It's about not allowing bias to come into people and children, particularly understanding of one another. And I believe very strongly in the issue of the condoms, that I think that is a decision that's up to the local school boards as to when and if they want to distribute condoms, if they want to allow children to have condoms in the schools.
But I'm asking you personally, are you going to leave that decision to the school board, or would you like to get involved and determine when your children would have access to condoms without your involvement?
I would leave that to the schools. I'm comfortable with my children and the education that they receive at home. I'm comfortable with the way that we have brought them up in the decision-making process. I am not threatened by what the schools might do to enhance education. But I also think that it's very important that as we teach these things, we teach them that first and foremost, the only sure way to prevent AIDS or to prevent other sexually transmitted diseases is by abstinence. That is the only sure way, followed by the rest of the discussion. But we have to start with that premise, because that's really what will make a difference in our children's lives.
Your rebuttal, Governor Florio?
I agree with everything that Mrs. Whitman said on that topic. And accordingly, would like to make reference to something else that was talked about earlier. Mrs. Whitman cavalierly threw out the fact that the penny off the sales tax was harmless. The end of the world didn't occur. Go talk to the 2.2 million people who lost their property tax homestead rebate. Some of them lost the whole $500. Many had it go down from $500 down to $90. And I know I said that, strange as it seemed, a lot of some people. The answer is, it is a lot. Go talk to the senior citizens who, as a cost of the penny, had their payment go up by 150%. Now, I've seen some members in the legislature say, well, you know, it's only $3. But a lot of seniors, and that's their budget. So I would just suggest that there is nothing for free, that we found that that penny cost people a lot of money, and the 1.5 is promising.
Michael,
is going to
your
cost a lot of
question
people
for
money
Governor
as well.
Florio.
Governor, the city of Camden, Congress for 15 years as one of the poor in America. Trenton, Newark, Paterson, and Jersey City have serious problems associated with poverty. Mrs. Whitman to unveil an urban initiative, as she said a month ago she would. Why aren't the cities in better shape after 4 years?
I will respect each and every city has a plan that is being worked through. As you know, on the Camden waterfront, there's $500 million in private sector investment that is taking place there. The Camden Initiative is designed to put industrial parks out into some of the neighborhoods, putting police on the streets. Within a week or so, we're going to be breaking ground for the Performing Arts Center in Newark. In Atlantic City, we're building around the obvious recreational and entertainment industry with the new convention hall. What one has to do is to find what the center of activity is in our communities, then build around it. The key is almost site-specific urban development. Up in Paterson, has a great and rich tradition of industrial and manufacturing development. What we're doing is going back and helping to build the new type of manufacturing entities. Smaller, more capital intensive, but we're working with New Jersey Institute of Technology and Stevens Institute with small entrepreneurs to build business and manufacturing incubators. So we have a city-by-city plan for all of our communities.
Michael, do you have
No, Mrs.
a
Whitman.
follow-up? Mrs. Whitman, your rebuttal.
Well, the problem for every city is jobs, and that's where we need to begin. That's why, as I have as part of the economic development program, I have endorsed a seed program, linked deposit, which would allow for low-interest loans for people starting businesses and who live and work in the inner cities, to starting businesses there, because we have to make a commitment that we cannot allow our cities to die here in New Jersey. They are too important a part of our whole fabric of life. That's why I've supported a program for creation of new jobs and looked and called for urban resource centers to be developed in every city, so that people have one place to go where they can find out information on programs that are available to them from all levels of government. But the most important thing, and the thing that's going to work the best, is when it understands it can't do it all and needs to work more closely with the private and the nonprofit sector to create jobs and to empower the people in those communities to make the difference in their lives, because they live there every day. They know what happens to their children night after night when they have to leave them alone, and they're the ones who will make the true difference.
All right. Begin the round once again with Ken Matz, and your question for Mrs. Whitman.
Mrs. Whitman, yesterday in East Brunswick, you promised to consult with state workers before making budget cuts that might result in layoffs. Won't such a deal make it difficult to implement your planned budget savings and tax cuts?
Now, Ken, in fact, I found that's one of the best ways to go. And workers, as I left that meeting, come up to me and say, you wouldn't believe the waste in my department. You wouldn't believe the waste in the other department. I want to work with you to cut it. When I was president of the Board of Public Utilities, and once I got our budget onto line item budgeting, I told my division directors that if they saved money, they could give part of that back to their employees in one-time bonuses. Within a month, I had one of my division directors come back to me with over $2,000 in savings, and presented me with a list of small one-time shots that he wanted to give to his employees, one-time benefits. I took that to Office of Management and Budget for the state, and they said, those checks are too small. We don't write them for that. And that's part of the problem. The workers in this state want to be part of efficiency. They want their hands untied, and they want to be unfettered by the regulations that are preventing that, and they're willing to tell you where you can make savings and where you can make cuts. And to leave them out of the process is losing and ignoring one of your best tools to really effectively changing government.
Your response, Governor.
Well, it's easy to go to workers' meetings and promise them layoffs and then go and say that there'll be $1.5 billion worth of cuts. The only problem, of course, is you can't do it that way. I mean, you can't go out and promise everyone who's in your face whatever they want to hear. You know, I understand that some of the workers are unhappy. We had to go and to provide for reductions in the work. As I said, 10,000 out of 72,000 is a large number. But in the 80s, the workforce grew by 20%, 12,000 prior 8 years. What we had to do is to start to get some control over the state government. And we've tried to do that without reducing services dramatically. What we've been able to do in many instances is enhance services because we've been doing it smarter. New Jersey Transit. In the last 3 years, we've had no fare increases. We've had no service reductions. The workforce is down a bit. We've been investing capital in ways that are providing for expanded service. We're on the verge of being able to go into this decade creating a New Jersey transit rail core system that really is going to be the envy of the nation.
The next question for Governor Florio. Ren?
Governor, WCBS New York Times poll out this afternoon, and I can tell you it has some good news and some bad news as far as you're concerned. The good news is it says that you are leading Mrs. Whitman some 15 percentage points. But the bad news, as far as you are concerned, is it says more people believe your story that you never need to raise taxes until after you were elected. And in fact, they say you made that statement just to try to win votes. Now, my question to you is, looking back on that, was it not somewhat irresponsible for a man who has been in politics as long as you to make such a statement knowing full well that there was always the possibility that you might have to raise taxes when you got into the State House?
Ren, make it very clear that I refused, though I was challenged by my opponent in 1989, to take a no new tax pledge. I did the same thing in 1981, and I'm doing the same thing in this campaign. You can never foresee out into 4 years or even into 1 year. I mean, the reporters are quite fond of anticipating what projected deficits are going to be into next July. It's guesswork. I mean, we don't know what the economy is going to be doing. It's starting to pick up, but I'm not going to go and tell you that we're going to have a great surge. So what I'm suggesting is you have to be candid with people. You can't go promise them, as Mrs. Whitman is promising them, 30% tax reductions, when in fact, if there is any projected deficit, structural deficits, whatever that is will be compounded by $1.5 billion on top of that when Mrs. Whitman says that she's going to hold out this prospect of sending everybody the $1,000 that she's promising them in the urgent gram if they vote for her. That's not responsible. And I've always tried to be responsible in dealing with these types of things. It's not easy making
Time
tough
is up,
decisions,
Governor, and you
but
have
that's
a
what being a
follow-up.
leader is about.
But Governor Florio, if you wanted to be responsible, why make the statement that you saw no need to raise taxes back in 1989 when it was a very real possibility?
Well, Ren, as you may recall, and you can go back and see, we cut some $2 billion out of the projected budget that was made when I came into office. If I had said in the course of a campaign that I'm going to cut $2 billion, and I remember all the protests in front of the State House. We had the arts people out there protesting the cuts. We had the farm people, the human services people. We made cuts. If I had told people we would make those cuts, they would have said there was no way we would have had to raise taxes. But we made the cuts and still had to raise taxes. The combination of the onslaught of the new recession that was coming just at that period of time and the entitlements that continued to grow resulted in us having to do those things. And I take full responsibility. We made the tough decisions. None of them were easy, but taking responsibility is what this is all about. It is not promising people in the sky.
Mrs. Whitman, your response.
Well, the governor just said now it's grown to $2 billion that he cut, but if he could cut $2 billion, he's worrying about my being able to cut $1.1 billion by limiting the rate of growth of state government. I mean, this is just one in a litany of broken promises from that campaign. He promised that he wasn't going to raise taxes, and then he did $2.8 billion. He promised he was going to lower auto insurance by 20%. Those were his words. We haven't seen any of that. Property taxes he promised were going to go down, and he held a press conference just the other day to pat himself on the back that they only rose 4% this year, and that's bigger and faster than the rate of inflation, and that's while property values were going down. We heard promises that the education system was going to get better, and that has failed. It's been a litany of broken promises, so I'm not surprised that he made that, and I think the public has to ask themselves, what are we going to see in the next 4 years? We've had a candidate Florio, and we had Governor Florio. We're getting candidate Florio again.
The last panel from the last question this evening from our panel, Michael Aron to Mrs. Whitman.
Thank you, Ken. Mrs. Whitman, you've said all summer that, and all fall that New Jersey used to be #1 and you want to return it to that position. At the same time, you want to get rid of the governor's helicopter and eliminate drivers for the cabinet. And you said you wanted to sell the governor's 3 residences, but I think you have backed away from that particular part of this pledge. Doesn't a first-class state deserve first-class support systems for its officials?
Oh, of course, but Michael, you don't need to have a helicopter with a wet bar and leather seats. You can take the state police's regular helicopter. Those are the kinds of small changes we're talking about making. What this state needs and deserves is a governor who understands when people lose their jobs. What this state needs is a governor who understands that it's the private sector that creates the kind of jobs that gives people the long-term security they need to feel comfortable here in New Jersey, to know that they can raise their children here, that they can retire here. That's what this state needs, and this state needs what other states now have gotten across this nation. A governor who says we can control the rate of growth of state government. We believe in the taxpayers' ability to spend their money wisely, and we want to leave the money in their pots. That's what this state needs, because if we do that, we can stimulate the economy and we can create jobs, and that is what this is all about, creating jobs.
Your rebuttal, Governor?
Mrs. Whitman wants to sell the helicopter that Governor Kane purchased. I have no difficulties whatsoever. She can sell it if she becomes the governor. But let me just, this is interesting. Who understands the pain of real people? If we want to compare real life experiences with going out and talking to real people, fine, we will compare them. I understand. I understand what it's like to not have a job. My father was out of a long period of time. I worked and committed myself to providing for real jobs to people because I know personally what it's about not to have someone in the household to work without a job. I'm troubled by Mrs. Whitman's whole approach to this problem, which is really going to result in increased taxes on people in a form that is the worst form of all, the property tax. Municipal experts, finance experts, mayors up and down this state have said, because they know what's in the Constitution, that if you go and take away the revenues from the income tax, what you have is the property taxes going up.
And that concludes the formal questions from our panel of reporters this evening. And now the format calls for the candidates to bring you their closing remarks. They will each have 90 seconds to do that. We begin with Mrs. Whitman.
I want to thank the Chamber of Commerce and NJN and CBS for providing tonight's forum. It's crucial as the voters go to the polls in 2 weeks that they understand the magnitude of the change and the challenge they have before them. For the past 4 years, we've watched New Jersey being hurt. Jobs lost, businesses leaving the state at a record level, auto insurance that is costing people their cars, failure in education to improve after $1.5 billion in new revenues. It's been a litany of people, coming down to people losing their homes and their hope. It doesn't have to be this way. I believe that we can see change. We can rate of growth in state government. We can put, and I am dedicated to putting money in the people's pockets, leaving it with the people who earned the money, leaving more of it in your pockets, because I believe that the people of the state of New Jersey understand how to spend their money wisely, and the turn is going to turn around and create jobs in this state. Jim Florio doesn't. He's proven that. Perhaps because I'm a woman and mother, I have always spent more than 30 and 60-second sound bites in talking about the complicated issues that face our state. And while that, I believe, is what the people deserve, it also gives someone who would like to twist issues and to change them more opportunity to so do. That's happened in this campaign, and that's, I think, a real failure. This election is about the future. And I just want to say that together we can bring this state back. It's about the future and about a wonderful future for the state of New Jersey. I'm an optimist. And I'd also like to say thank you, and please vote for me. Go
Governor,
Phillies.
Your closing remarks. Please, in 90 seconds, you can do your applause. Thank you very much.
I, too, want to thank the stations and the Chamber, of course, for giving us this opportunity to talk about the very stark differences that exist between myself and Mrs. Whitman. In 2 weeks now, the people will make their choice about whom it is they think should be the governor. They've heard of ideas, they've heard our ideas, and they've heard our plans and our programs. Now they have to make a determination as to who is willing to take the responsibility for the tough decisions to be able to carry one's plans out to reality. You know, I've made in these last couple of years, and I'm prepared and have taken the responsibility for all of them. I've learned a lot in 4 years. It always hasn't been pleasant, but it's made me a better person, and I think it's made me a better governor. The people of this state also have to determine who has the credibility to be the governor, who does best understand the needs of real people, what people's hopes are, what people's dreams are all about. I'm proud that we have been able to work very hard in tough times to be able to start the process of bringing our economy back and generating jobs. I'm perhaps most proud of the fact that we preserved and protected the Jersey Shore. We stood up to the NRA and all the special interests. In these 3 years, we've balanced 3 budgets, no new taxes, and we've even set a little bit aside in our rainy day fund that we've created. I'm not going to promise you the moon and not tell you how to pay for it. I will promise you that I will work as hard as I possibly can to make sure that this state stays as a place of opportunity for all of those people who come after us, the same way that it's been for us.
I did say you could clap, but I'll ask you to hold up for just a bit here till I say our thanks to all of the participants tonight. That does conclude the 1993 New Jersey gubernatorial debate. We have heard the candidates address a wide array of issues here tonight. I'd like to thank Mrs. Whitman, Governor Florio, for their participation in this exchange. I'd like to thank our panel of questioners, Ken Matz, Ren Scott, and Michael Aron, for being with us this evening. I'd like to thank you in our audience and the viewers at home for your attention. And don't forget, Election Day is 2 weeks away, November 2nd. We hope this exchange has helped to make you a better voter. I'm Kent Manahan. Very much from all of us, and good night.